Hey, community. I am delighted to share with you Cortney McDermott on the Rebirth podcast today. She's an author. She's a best-selling author, and we're going to talk about her book, Give Yourself Permission. And don't let the title give you the indication that you've heard this before. Cortney has an amazing way of offering a solution in the simplicity of being. Now, listen, she is an award-winning author, a TEDx speaker, a mind-body expert who helps the world's leading organizations and creatives disrupt old patterns of behavior, grow healthy businesses, and apply the physiology and psychology needed for success, which is reflected in her new book, Give Yourself Permission. Her work in the field of self-development and business strategy has been featured in Women's Health, Success, The Huffington Post, Fox News, and many other mainstream businesses and lifestyle media. Now, with that level of success and acclaim, it was so refreshing, the kindness and tenderness and the presence that she brought to this podcast. Cortney is someone that will listen as she shares, and I highly recommend getting her book where she goes into depth into more experiences that she has in this this rebirthing, right? This idea of being one person and then having a moment where you decide to let go and let life lead you into, as I believe she would use the word, of a consciousness change, right? It's always there. We just have to relax the impediments that let us see that there's only one way or there's only one story, and kind of move into the idea of interconnectedness. I really enjoyed this podcast. I'm delighted to share her mission and her story, her presence, and listen closely for when she talks about play over performance. If you are one of my listeners for a long time, we have a lot of people here that feel like they always need to be doing something more. And I think this gem she gives us of play over performance is a great question to ask yourself. I've been, since I've interviewed her, to see if your body is like, oh, I can have more fun, I can have more ease. And then what happens is your capacity opens. Your resonance alters to something that can be a little bit closer, giving yourself permission to bring in that which you're looking to actually cultivate. So sit back, enjoy this episode, and be sure to check out Cortney's book, Give Yourself Permission. Thanks for tuning in. Did you know Rebirth is also a book? You can order it online or at any of your local favorite bookstores. Let me know how you find it. If you're curious about the Listen to Her sessions, they're specifically designed for intuitive clarity to arrive and resound over your daily noise and doubt. They gift you with available insight and inspired action, personally and professionally, uplifting your daily reality and collective frequency, because that's what magnetism does. If you're curious, go to katebretton.com where you can learn more. Now let's get back to the episode. I'm really excited that you are here. Honest.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
You've recently released, I'm going to do, just so if in this moment, we'll do your whole introductions because it's very uncomfortable sometimes. Although you talk about it in your book, listening to somebody introduce you and all of your accolades, and then wanting to come into the present moment. So on the Rebirth podcast, we just drop it into the present moment. We'll do all the links, but let's just start with where we are. And can you tell us a little bit about how your second book came to be? Because it's what's bringing you in this cross point of all of these people that are coming into your field. So how did this book ask you to write it?
Yeah, good question. I love that. No one's ever asked me that way. And it's so perfect for this book because it needed to be written right then. And it was funny because I started the book, it's called Give Yourself Permission. And I had this very linear outline where it was, give yourself permission to do this and give yourself permission to do that, because I had seen in both my corporate career and also in my career as an entrepreneur, so many people just afraid to give themselves permission for so many reasons. And so I had come at it with I had this fully formed sort of structure in my head, and it was very linear. And I started the writing in that way, in a kind of very linear fashion. And then exactly what I'm talking about in the book started to take over, of this nonlinear force source energy that just courses through you and says, no, this is the way. And I could see the sort of internal battle as well, like oscillating between, but it has to be this way. And then, oh no, it's something completely different that you couldn't even possibly imagine. So it was funny because I learned a lot actually post writing this book, more than during the writing itself, and starting to see more of this nonlinear force sort of take hold and drive things. So, but that was
That's
the
fun. So was it sort of like you were being written, and then as you're reading your drafts or reading what you've shared with people, you're like, oh, that's me now? Like, was it like that kind of alchemy that like you're writing what's true, it was true and what was coming through, but you're actually living it post speaking it in some ways?
Yeah, definitely. And there were so many experiences that I was describing in the book of things that had happened to me that I was explaining the best I could. And now I feel like after writing it, it's like, wow, I have so much, a much clearer understanding of it. At least like, not even necessarily in the sense of being able to explain it or to give practices or anything like that, but really just be living it, right? And so what I've noticed after, especially after the second book, but definitely also during the writing, was how, yeah, this energy or this intelligence, I think that's actually the more accurate way to describe it, was working through me. It was like this formless force sort of using the form, right? And so, and of course, I mean, all of our greatest spiritual traditions talk about this in some form or another, but it's like when you're living it, it's a whole nother bag of chips. Yeah. Yeah.
A couple of the things that I loved about the book that I've read so far is the marriage I think when someone's successful in the corporate world and a woman, and then there's like this effulgent moment to expand past, there's a wisdom that's carried that you can reach others because you know the language of it, and you know the gauntlet and the trade-off. And there seems to be like a little bit of a crumbling right now of just saying, well, you have to do what's profitable, or I'm all for profit. I'm not living in a delusional world on that. But I think including the human as part of the lucrativeness of a venture is what's coming more and more to the fore. And to get people to understand that that is actually a lucrative process, I think it has to come from like voices such as yours.
Well, thank you. I've seen that a lot, where I've seen people coming at this from I'm so hesitant to use words like spiritual. It's like one of those
You
words
can
that
use it here. You can
I'm
totally
like,
use it here.
well, but I mean, in the sense that it gets so just kind of almost bastardized or used in ways. I mean, like everything spiritual, you know what I mean? So it's a little bit, but I see some people who come at business leaders with a more maybe an approach that doesn't say, I know you, I see you, I've been where you are, and there might be a better way. And in fact, I've found a better way. So, so I do agree with you that this bridge needs to be divided, because lots of times, like, who's making those decisions, right? And so we look at things, and for a long while in my career, I was also in charge of corporate responsibility or sustainability, in addition to corporate communications. And I remember just thinking, like, we're looking at the wrong stuff. I mean, waste and emissions, like, fabulous that you're doing things there, but really it's what started these problems in the first place, what gave rise to them, what gave birth to them. And so I actually completely revolutionized my way of thinking about sustainability. I created my own definition. That's what actually was the impetus of the first book, and my first TEDx talk was like, okay, we really need to talk about the origins of this and get back to the microcosm. That's then obviously, because that's our fastest and easiest way to be able to heal the macrocosm, right? And so I really felt very strongly about it. And so it was great that I did have that business acumen, but then also got applied to strategy. It got applied to human potential, which was my real passion all along. That was just slowly and actually magically, and then very quickly revealing itself. And so, yeah, I agree with you, though. We do need more voices that can bridge those divides and speak to both sides.
Yeah, because both feel kind of alienated. Like, I know I speak with a lot of women, like healing or artistic, that have that, like, well, I can't do this because that is, I've defined myself on the outside of that. And you talk about this in the book. Like, there's a phrase that you use about, loosening on the ridges of like the intellect. Like, if you're helping or you're in service of people, then you've aligned yourself that you're outside of the corporate norm. And then if you're inside the corporate norm, you have to like be really quiet if you talk about a chakra, or if you mention something about energy work or intuition and making business practices. And I'm specifically bringing this up because a lot of our listeners, even though they span about 30 years in age, they have this cusp of like, I from what I hear from them, like being themselves 70%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like this is the moment, like what you're addressing is like that last 30 can open up a realm of magic. And I'm going to use the word pleasure in the way that it's deeply overused right now with women, but in a repossession of it, that you can just be joyful in the essence of what you're doing. Just like spiritual has been overused. And I try to tell people, like, read the writers that were, like you mentioned Neville Goddard in your book, who I love, or like Rudolf Steiner, and how they had a parlance of like spiritual development or internal development. And that's what I see that you're doing. It's spiritual is everywhere, but how do we bring the discernment in? So coming back to the idea of helping people live into that 30%, because I feel like when I'm reading in your book, but with the second book, you already are living a very large life, but you're also being pretty courageous and sharing some of your experiences that your audience might not be familiar with. And so that's kind of you leaning into that 30% too, was how I saw it.
Oh, absolutely. And I was so afraid to share some of those experiences just because of also, right, the nature of the clientele I have, et cetera. And also because normally when you hear about experiences like the ones I'm talking about, they happen through psychedelics, they happen through other means, right? And so kind of stumbling into these experiences of a deep knowing, and also kind of a transcendence, and even transcendence of kind of everything really, was so, for me. And those started happening, I want to say that they started happening about 5-6 years ago. And I was always thought that I would just kind of keep this as a gift to myself, of these experiences that happened. And I thought, I'll keep teaching and I'll keep doing this. But it was like, no, 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 no. You have to share this now. And you're right. It was definitely me opening up to the rest of me. But I also think when we talk about me, lots of times, especially if we're in these environments that have so much invested in identity, right? We talk about ourselves and we say, I'm this kind of person. And I mentioned this briefly in my book because I'm a huge fan of etymology and languages in general. I study them. I've lived in different countries and things, and speak different languages. And one word that I really love is person, because it comes from persona, which were the masks that they wore in ancient Greek theater. And when I found that out, when I discovered that, I just thought it was so perfect, because again, we go around like, I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person. What if you're all of it? What if you're potentially all of it, and you're choosing every day what expression is going to make its way through your form? And so I started to play around with that. And then as I started to also go deeper into some of the science behind epigenetics and neuroscience, and even the practical applications of quantum theory, what I was discovering was like, whoa, like this reinvention thing is actually a real thing. It's not like, it's not something just woo-woo or some idea that, it's thrown out there all the time, like reinvent yourself or whatever. Like, no, oh my God. And I started to have these experiences where I was like, shoot, I am literally reinventing myself. And you can see it in the people who see me, everyone kind of makes comments on this. And I sometimes, even in some of my presentations, show a picture of myself when I was in corporate like 10 years ago. And half the audience doesn't even recognize me. I look completely different. And so it was understanding, kind of, for me, I had to really break down like what actually happened here. So I did have to go into science, but I also, very aptly to your point, I had to say, I'm not going to let fear lead here. I'm going to let this courageous, and I guess courageous is like the perfect word, courage, like from the heart. I had let this just something deeper, something more true lead the way. And the more I've done that, the more, as you said, the more magic has arisen. So yeah.
I love how you describe a little bit about how the brain, the waves, I think your metaphors are really apt, and I want to talk about that. But I'm also wondering, was science the doorway for God to walk in? Like, was that the bridge for you? Because it was like corporate, and then you went to neuroscience. Sometimes people go the other way around, like they're I mean, there's no way, right? This isn't about the right or a hierarchy. This is just cross audience contemplations. Sometimes people go into like yoga, and then all of a sudden they realize that they harness like neuroscience to actually make money off of teaching yoga. And then some people are in corporate, and then they get confronted with something that they can't find their way around. And so neuroscience, or something like a little bit outside of the norm, is the stepping stone. And I find that it's wherever you're coming from kind of bridges you so that you then fall into the abyss. And I don't mean a bad abyss, but I mean, it's not all roses when you completely reinvent yourself. So,
Oh my
yeah.
God, no. No, and I think it's important for people to realize like the fear of the not rose, or falling into the abyss or losing yourself. What I have found is actually the more I've let that self go, the more I've actually found it, the more I found what's really true. And it's funny because you would think that people teaching these kinds of concepts and having these kinds of experience, like you would almost consider maybe getting to a point of a non-entity. I know lots of my clients get afraid of this sometimes because they're like, whoa, well, you get to this point where there's a fine line between like apathy and realizing that you're everything, like there's only one game in town, and so all of the other games sort of disappear. And so if you don't, if you choose to, like, you could potentially lose yourself. But actually what I found is that the more you just surrender to it, the more this majesty and this deep, beautiful mystery that's just constantly unfolding keeps unfolding for you. But what I've also seen is, when you're going through that process of reinvention, it's super important to like find those, whatever those anchors are too for you, to just keep you, as much as possible, to like, to keep that faith alive. And I will call it faith because I don't mean that in a religious sense. But I mean it in the sense of like really, really relying on life and on that force
on your
energy.
heartbeat, like on the fourth energy, like on your heartbeat, that you're still here.
Right, exactly. I mean, if we think about it, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, is like, you're relying on that for everything. I mean, almost everything, really, truly, actually, everything that counts, you rely on that for, both internally and externally. So, it's not like you wake up in the morning, unless you've got a heart condition, you don't wake up being like, is my heart beating? Is it not beating?
Right.
Are the trillions of biochemical reactions occurring in my body this second? Are they doing their job? Are they coordinating one with every other one? I mean, that's happening in your body right this second, right? But
Right.
there's no conscious part of you that's trying to direct that or create a 5-year plan for it. Just like there's no conscious part of you, at least, we hope there's no conscious part of us is like, is the sun going to come up? Is it not going to come up? All of these things, right? The tides, the rotation of the planet, like all of this, we're not sitting there contemplating or fearing that it's not, or thinking that we need to do something to keep it all on track. And yet we take this minuscule part of our, of our existence, and we do that. And I think that's where this illusion of separation really kicks in, and also where, again, we get overly identified to the identity, right? And so we start to fight for that identity. And the reason I believe that we do that is because it's so scary to, like, just kind of let go of everything, right? Because again, it comes back to the point you were making a minute ago. It can be scary, but also, and this is where I was coming with the abyss and things, is that something else really remarkable happens, or at least happened with me and happened with a lot of people that I've worked with, which is that when you actually kind of do, I want to say relax, okay, rather than surrender. I kind of prefer relax. Like when you just relax around all of it, the things that are not rosy are somehow really beautiful. Like the things that before seem to just kind of cripple you or knock you out for a couple of days, or even the sadness or the anger or the whatever, like you get to sort of be in this position where they're all kind of the same thing and they're all beautiful, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm wondering how, I don't want to pin one answer on you. So I'm wondering how to toss the question of, it sounds like you're, and if you've kept your coaching practice, and you're still traveling, that you're going around and working with people that are in leadership positions to move towards a place of wholeness, right? Because that's really what the relaxing is.
Oh God, so beautifully put. Exactly. And I don't really do much one-on-one training anymore because it's like super niche and I work with very, very few people one-on-one. And, but I do a lot of talks and I talk to a lot of business leaders and I go into corporations and universities and different organizations. And I go in and talk with people who I feel like these people, when they get it, are going to be able,
The leaders to carry the frequency on.
They're lit up, they light other people up. And it's really kind of
Mhm.
actually it's almost deceptively simple, because when you look at what we're talking about here, this intelligence, it's like you feel it like a light. You feel it, an energy, an enthusiasm, and theos, in God. You feel it like something else is, working.
Operating. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the thing is, and then when they hear a talk or something and they get that vibe energy, it doesn't even matter what it's at that point, it doesn't even matter like what's directed, because it all it can do is light up other beings. And it reminds me a lot of Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. There's this line in there that I absolutely adore, which is lighthouses don't go all over the island looking for people to save. Lighthouses just stand there shining. So it's like, turn it on if it's off, turn it up if it's low, keep turning it up. And the brighter it gets, I mean, who knows how, where it can go. I've seen so many truly remarkable things happen in this life. And I always joke that I've lived so many lifetimes in this life, but it's like so many remarkable things that you're just like, wow, how much better can it get? How much bigger and brighter and better can it get? And again, this doesn't preclude situations or things that make us feel uncomfortable, that make us feel that. But like I said, they all become kind of part of, precisely to your point, the wholeness of being, the integration of all of it. And then again, being able to make those choices, but you're integrated. And so there's no longer that sense of so much judgment and confinement around specific ideas or identity roles and things like that. Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful explanation. I was wondering, I'm like, how are you doing all of this? But that would make sense. And I think also when you teach in a group dynamic, there's like, not in a religious sense, although it's said there, it's like where two or more are gathered, but it's true because the potency of the room magnifies the intention and the energy if the intention is pure. So I can understand how lighting that, then it's like almost like you're traveling and teaching now, giving people permission to change their frequency.
Oh,
I like the word frequency. I have a toddler. It's like I'm always telling him, like, well, is there another channel you could change? Like I instead of saying you're saying this wrong, I'm trying to find,
I love that. That is awesome. That is so good.
and so then he'll be like, okay, may I please I'm like, okay, see what you can do when you change your frequency. And it's funny because I'm not doing it from a consciousness, like that's what starts to happen though, right? Like you think things are divided and then they merge. And you had mentioned Hawaii and how in the practice there, and I think it's really strong there because of the cultivation of the land, right? The land is any intact land offers a really simple place to change your mind, right? Because it's interactive. So I find that very fascinating as well. And I'm wondering, I understand that you're working with groups, that if you've had people, this is something that's interesting when people are in the middle, because I think your book addresses this. If you've kind of been on that path where you're like, yes, I know everything is like, this is great. And then you hit the discombobulation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was actually the subject of my first book. I had sort of collected all the gold stars and I was in all the places that the world says mean success and translate to success, and had all the things like material and even in socially and in my work and titles and all the things. And it was like, whoa, I was not lit up. I mean, I was partially, obviously, like the light had never gone out completely, but it was like just so many things and so many signs of it, in my body, in the way my mind was operating, kind of as the master instead of the humble servant. I don't remember if that was Einstein or somebody else who talked about it being a great servant and a terrible master, something along those lines. But I was very much in that. And so my first book was I actually started sitting on, I'm sitting on the corporate jet, I'm sipping the espresso, I'm on my way to Brussels, and like my BlackBerry's blocked. At the time we had BlackBerries and iPhones. Right. It was like, we had both. And I just remember that I had everything, quote unquote, in there. And I remember kind of like freaking out, and it was a public holiday, and there weren't like, I couldn't get a hold of the IT guys. Long story was, I was in this gnarly situation that I thought was a gnarly situation, which was really nothing. But at the time it was like, oh my God, I'm going somewhere. I don't have the details of where I'm going. I have a meeting tonight. I don't know who I'm meeting with, all these kinds of things. And then I just seriously stopped and I was like, who the hell's script is this? Who wrote this? Like, where is this coming from?
You broke through, like the loss of control. You could hear yourself, like the control of the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was like so many cold shower moments like that. I wrote about that one to start the book off because it's a little bit more dramatic, but I had so many cold shower moments like that where, I was dropping my daughter off at school and just weeping, or, just feeling this like very deep disconnection from my husband, who became my ex-husband. We were married for 18 years. And it was just like, but there was this huge divide, and I had married him as a child. And it was just like, all of these, like, because I had finished school so young, I was already living abroad, all these things. So it was sort of like, I just went through the motions of what I thought, it was like success was perennially around the corner. It was like, it was one more milestone, one more goal, one more thing that if I just achieved this, then everything would be fine. Or if I just learned how to, patch up everything in my marriage, or whatever it was like, there was always something that I had to do. And I was never there. Like, here was never there. And so I just had so many cultures. So for me, I think your question, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, so definitely correct me if I am, but like how I got out of that was, I often joke that it was like a cold and lonely hallelujah. Like, I sort of had to just ride out like all this discomfort. And even going back to the question that you asked earlier, because it brought up something really deep in me, which was, it's like all those things, yoga or whatever it is that gets you to these realizations, like actually all of life is that. Every single thing is that. Whatever practice or non-practice or moment is literally like a moment to let it in, to know who you are, to experience who you are, or to hide from what you are. And to just let it, like, you just like over here, So for me, I felt I was at a point where there were just way too many moments where I was hiding, and I wasn't doing it on purpose. I mean, no part of me was saying like, oh, I'm going to hide from the divine. But like, isn't that the funniest thing? Like we hide from this power. And it reminds me of that quote. It's been attributed to different people. I think, I've heard it most attributed to Marianne Williamson, but like, your greatest fear is not,
who you're not, but who you actually are, the power.
Right.
And that's what keeps coming up with this question. Okay. So this is interesting. I was wondering, like, how am I going to bring this up? So, well, before I get there, I'm going to backtrack. What is the difference for the listener of the woman? So the woman on the plane that didn't have her BlackBerry, notice I'm purposely not saying you, but the woman on the plane that didn't have her BlackBerry had to cross one threshold to write a book that she probably didn't think she was going to write, which was your first book. What is the difference of the threshold for the second book?
Oh my God. First of all, I love the way you frame questions. I love the way your mind works. I love the way you talk. I am literally hypnotized. I mean, half the times I'm like, wait, how am I going to answer it? Because it's so beautifully put. Okay. The difference between the woman who was on that plane and wrote that book, and the woman who wrote this book, Give Yourself Permission. I think books, just like talks, just like this conversation that we're having right now, is a snapshot of our consciousness in any given moment. So in that moment, the consciousness that, that inhabits this body was very much still driven by external motivation. And the consciousness that's inhabiting this form right now, and that's seeking to express through this form now, has finally and very luckily let that go. And so now I'm in a place where, and it's such a brilliant place to be in. You mentioned the stage where I was backstage and listening to them, you know, sing off the accolades and all of that. And I purposely was back there, like no part of the person, the character wanted to take the stage unless it was in service. And I don't use that word lightly. I very rarely use the word service, but it's really, really apropos in this instance, because it was like, I was bowing to that intelligence within me. I only wanted the intelligence to use, you know, any part of the character that it needed to use to do what needed to be done. In the second book, I still wasn't entirely there in the writing, I feel, to be totally frank, but I was close. And there were definitely a lot of parts in that book that I felt like, okay, it's setting in. And now what's happening is extraordinary, because what's happening with me now is like, I will get, you know, questions for releases or client summaries that I'll be working on. And I don't even sit at my computer anymore. I lay down and I dictate, like I ask a question of this intelligence and I dictate the answers. And when I was on that stage in Colombia, it was striking. I mean, I was up there for almost 4 hours. There was like over 3 hours of Q&A. And
That's a lot.
it was just channeling. And again, another word I don't use lightly, but it was just channeling.
It is what it is. Yeah, it is
what it is. And so that is the difference, is like now, luckily, the part, whatever that was, still, you know, remaining in this consciousness of like, you need to show something, you need to prove something, you need to get up there as a character, you need to shine in the character, you know, whatever that was so resilient, because it hung on for so long. And I'm telling you, I've had like some pretty big stage events where that has held on, and I've given the performance, right? And that's the difference between, and that's another thing I'll just underline, and then we can move into any other questions, which is like the difference between performing and playing.
Yes, please open that door.
So like my whole life, I was taught to perform. I mean, when I was a little kid, and you know, it's funny because I always, you were asking like kind of when I got into this, but I think I've been into this really my whole life, because I grew up in a family of 5 kids, born in under 7 years. I was second to last. It was definitely a situation where, you know, you like had to get in there. And I had a lot of, I would say like very, very young, having like existential crises, you know, and I think I was kind of, I don't want to say alone in that, but I definitely was different in that, you know, from most people that I ran across. And it wasn't like I even realized that at the time. I kind of realized that much later, but like, why was I reading these human potential books when I was 5? You know what I mean? Like, what was it that was so attractive to me? But so like having to come back to that. But the difference between performing, which is what I grew up in, and like this whole, like get noticed, get attention, right? Because if you think about it, you know, we talk about these phones, for example, and I write about this a lot. I write about phones. I write about, you know, how to kind of wean your way out of that distraction. But we talk about phones as being the addictive substances. Phones are not what's addictive, like in and of themselves. Although, you know, of course, billions are invested annually to keep us returning, like the pings and all that. But that's not what we're really going after with the phone. The drug, the addiction is attention.
Yeah, lonely. Yeah.
It's what do you think of me? And from the time that we're real little, at least I know I was, and most people I know were, kind of trained in thinking like, you know what other people think of you is more important than what you think of you.
True.
Yeah.
Even best case scenario, you're told that so that you'll survive, right? Like if you can get a good job or get a good school or get a good letter recommendation. So it can come from the best, it can come from not great places, but it can also come culturally from really supportive places, which makes it even harder to unwind, right? Because it's really in there.
You nailed it, because that's the thing, is like this is mostly well-intentioned. Like most of society is really well-intentioned about it, and they're so congratulatory, but it's like, how do you free yourself from that drug? How do you stop performing so that you can actually play? You know, in some of the I think it's in the I want to say in the Vedic traditions that they call, I want to say that might be inaccurate, but lila.
It's a Sanskrit word for the divine play.
Yeah, play, exactly. And so it's like this idea of play, you know, and that being actually the fundamental nature of all existence, right? And so it's like, when do you get to that point? And I think, again, this brings in the whole person character thing again. Like if I show up there and I really truly believe that I'm only that role and that's it, right? And I believe it, then I can't really play anywhere else.
Oh, that's well said. I can hear
You
that.
know?
Yeah.
So like one of the things that I noticed is if I had the audacity and the courage and also oftentimes like the stupidity, I'll put it straight, like it was stupidity most of the time to get really naked, like because I didn't know any different, because I couldn't do any different. And so, you take your costume off and then it's like, whoa, when you take your costume off and you're like naked, I mean, you get a lot of heat. It's like, get back into your role,
Yeah,
put your costume back on, right? But if you can withstand the heat of that, and not in an aggressive way, I don't believe in doing this aggressively. This is about seeking your own truth in your own sense of, I'll call it love. So if you have the audacity to stay in that white fire for the time that it takes, because it will take a bit, or might not, it doesn't always, but it's going to take some suffering. But if you can stay with that, then on the other side is this reinvention that we're talking about. And again, if it's done in this way, like you're not doing it to harm anyone, you're doing it because this is what's true for you, or becoming true for you and who you're becoming.
Beautiful. I want to let that just stand on its own. It's reminding me in the phase of your book, which I appreciated that you even changed the formatting, where you talk about like, I don't want to tell you, I'll just share my writings. And so then you're going from a traditional PDF to this invitation with the circular imprint so that the reader can go find that for themselves. And we'll link the book here. But I love the moment, where you like, I could barely read the handwriting. And there's the one word that you said that you were, and then you I took a shower, and it's like, in this moment, it reminds me of, I think I'm not trying to change names, but it's like Nostargadata. I'll have to look it up. But like, there's a mountain, there's no mountain, there's a mountain again. There's this idea that you get to this place where there's nothing, but to stay and play, you have to still participate. And so I thought it was fast when I'm reading your book, and I've heard you talk a little bit about some of the yogis who maintain their personality because that's what's needed. It's sort of like when you're aligned with divine service, which is a really grandiose term. Let me just say that that's not something I would like lightly throw around, but I think I'm talking about like the innately divine. Like when you find your essence, you're boiling down to like the spark, right? The spark that no matter what they do, what they try to explain away, they cannot give you a definition of the spark, right? So something that can grow from a spark to a larger flame, it's the service to that. And I'm not speaking that I have episodes of that. I'm not living in that in a contiguous flame of that. But I do know, I have embodied experience of when you're in a service moment, you're not tired, words come, clarity comes. You're not really, some people say, well, it's not me. That's also dangerous because you have to do a lot of work to be non-present, to be used. It's like a polarity. Like you have to really work really hard to not think it's you, but then you can't play the card that diverts yourself, because then you put yourself right back at zero again, And so I see a lot of that in what you're sharing. And I'm interested. I'll tell you why I was kind of shocked when the email came in, because I do a couple different things. And I was saying to somebody, I'm like, I just think I should just spend my time like talking to people. Like I've done it in some stages. And then the request for your podcast came in and I freaked out. I wish I could have said, I was like, oh, and I was like, the universe had called me on my bluff of, oh, well, here's a woman that's going, you said you wanted to go around and talk to people, right? Okay, well, now here's a woman. And you do a lot more than that. But you know how when the universe calls your bluff, it's very cheeky,
Yes.
And I almost didn't return the email. That's why I'm sharing it with you. And then I started to read your book and I thought, because even when we say the reason I'm bringing this up is even someone who can help other people, I'm talking about myself, when we're called to the task of our next level up or our next dive in, whatever way the metaphor works for you, you confront your own bluff, right? Whatever it is. And so that's why I was like laughing. So my friend's like, so wait, someone that is in alignment with work that you admire, you're not going to call her. I was like, no, I know I'm going to, but I just think the turnaround was like within 48 hours. And that's why I find it very fascinating that the tonality of your writing is very accessible. And a lot of people teach concepts in a way that are hierarchical, so that what they're teaching inadvertently goes back upon themselves, which is fine. It's a way to write. But when you're in service, there's a lot of work to writing a book and living and making the courageous decisions. But the tonality of your phrasing is very accessible. And it's very kind. Meaning, when you're like, listen, you can do whatever you want. If you pick up your phone right away, I definitely know what beta wave you're in. I mean, it's no problem. You're like, but it's very honest and it's very kind. And so I'm curious about, as I'm talking to you, the word frequency just keeps coming up. And I'm wondering, in your rewriting of your mission or your vision, which you may or may not have done with where you are in the synthesis of the second book, what are you doing now? And I don't mean that in that you have to change your work, but I feel that probably the tonality with which you're meeting people has changed.
Oh, absolutely. And, first of all, thank you, because lifetimes went into learning, or not, I wouldn't say learning, becoming who I need to be to deliver the message in the way that I do. And so I appreciate your ability to see that and to perceive it in their writing. And it's funny because what I want more than anything is to make all of this accessible, right? And so it's funny, Da Vinci is quoted as saying simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, if I ask someone what they do and they can't explain it to me in a way that I could go and explain it to anybody else, then they don't really know what they're doing yet.
It's really true.
Yeah. Like they don't know what they're doing yet. That's okay. I hope they get there. God bless. But and I mean this with total humility, because I'm telling you, I feel so, and I'm not even sure if humble is the right word to say it, but like, I literally am brought to my knees by the forces in me and the forces outside of me, and the force that brought it to where it is. Because now I can immediately sense, like, it or you don't know it yet. And I can sense it with anybody, and it's just like, I always joke, like I have a truth detector, like I have a built-in truth detector. I mean, it is wild. I mean, the tiniest little thing, and I'm like, no, something's off, right? And I think that's also how clear is your being. We talk about purity, pure comes from clear, right? Like how much have you actually gone through that cleansing process in that not knowing? Like, I can truthfully say, like, I don't know anything, but I know that there's this intelligence. All the other things that I might study, that I might learn about, that I might teach about, they're all, for me, windows into, it's almost like, that famous idea of like, you're pointing at the moon, but your finger is not the moon, right? So like if someone's looking at your finger, but there's another, I don't remember who told this story. It was so funny. Like, say I want to, and they weren't using Chicago, but that's my hometown. So I'll use Chicago. Say I want to go to Chicago, and like and everyone tells me I get to Chicago, and I go to Chicago and I come back and someone says, oh, did you go to Chicago? And you say, yeah, I went to Chicago. Oh, well, how was it? Well, it was a big white sign that said Chicago. And I was there, right? So it's like, let's not confuse the sign for the experience of what it is a reference. So everything that it took for those experiences to come, the grace and the grit that it took for the experience to get to where it is, to be able to convey some of that simply. So that I want to say before I go into answering the question, which is like, I think what the question was, which was the evolution of my work now. Mm-hmm. And the way I'm living it right now, because it's funny, because people always call me a coach. I'm like, I'm not a coach. And what's so funny about that is people used to always call me a teacher. Even when I was growing up, I was like, teacher. And my teachers would call me a teacher. You're a natural born teacher. And I always railed against that. Even when I was a professor, I was a university professor at Big Ten US universities. And I was like, I'm not a teacher. Like I'm not. But then I realized the origins of that were, because I guess I always lived it as like someone telling you what you're supposed to
Mm,
do.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I always sort of had an issue with that.
Sure.
Because I don't believe anyone knows what you're supposed to do. I certainly don't know. I get executives, I get, forget corporate 500, I get, corporate 50 executives being like, what do we do? And I'm like, don't know what you should do, but the good news is you do, right? Like you do. So let's go let's go in. And I think in a world that's constantly having us look out, right? It's like, how do we go in? So the evolution of my work has been, like I said, doing much less one-on-one. Is I love it so much, because when I do one-on-one, it's like I get all sorts
Off
of
the charts. Yeah,
I
for
get
sure.
downloads that are like the most. I mean, I'm constantly like, where did that go? I mean, it's wild. I love the one-on-one. I'm not doing that much, but because it's a super niche right now. But I do plan on. It's funny that you should ask, because it was really just today that I was like, I think I'm gonna get a place in Italy, because I mean, most of the year I live in Italy. I travel a lot, but my base is Italia. And I'm like, I found this beautiful place. And I'm like, I think I'm going to get it and do some retreats, like not very many, but just some, few retreats. And then I'm going to, even though I never would have thought I'd say I'm going to write more books, I think I'm definitely going to be writing more books because of the way the writing's coming through. And because, like I said, they're snapshots and the consciousness is evolving so rapidly within this form that I'm like, yeah, I don't see another way to kind of keep up in terms of sharing what I'm learning in a way that, like I said, will hopefully be accessible to as many people as possible. Because again, like, I don't think this experience is supposed to be about like the grind. And when you kept coming back to frequency, like in the radio, I love that you're teaching your son that it's like, there are other stations, there are other frequencies, there are way many other potentials. I mean, truly, if we were to look at it from a mathematical or scientific perspective, I mean, they're infinite, the potentials available to us. So what are we doing? Like,
That
I
is
don't
the
know.
question. What are we doing? Why are we making it so difficult? And why are we so attached to it being so difficult?
My shortest answer to that. Sorry, I have wool for hair, so I'm just gonna like it's warm here. I'm just gonna put a little over the other side. So what are we doing? My best take on it is
Mm-hmm.
like, this is from all the learnings, and even from and most especially I would say from just my own experiential understanding of things, is like, this is the greatest show ever. And if we look at it from a perspective of there's one consciousness, like even if you look at it, a book that I absolutely adore is The Holographic Universe. It's by Michael Talbot, he's passed, but his form is passed, but he was a quantum physicist. And one of the examples that he presented in his book when he was talking about quantum entanglement was like, imagine you have a camera on a fishbowl, two cameras on a fishbowl, or a fish tank, and you're catching the movement of this fish, right, from these different angles. And if you're looking at these two separate representations, you would think that it's two fish, but you would wonder, like, how come when this one goes this way, the other one goes that way? How come this is all coordinated, right? Which again, if you look at it even from another scientific perspective, something like organized chaos, like there's an underlying order to all of this, right? So it's like, if we were to take it again from either a scientific perspective, and we can go in deeper on those if you want, or a philosophical / quote unquote spiritual traditions that have been around for millennia, it's like there's one intelligence that governs all of it. If we are, for example, right now, just self-talking to self, trying to understand self, how freaking cool is that, right? I mean, and yet at the same time, it's like we have these infinite games. I don't remember, I think that was a title of a book, but I love that idea, like infinite games, like all of these ways that self is exploring itself because of the magnitude of what it is. And again, this is whatever, however you want to call that, intelligence, God, self, however you want to call it. I think that's what we're still doing, because it's still amusing. Lila.
Because
Still
it's
fun.
still amusing. Then I guess, and I'm just having this thought now, then one could say that the the hold on control would be the part, because I think also it's like a polarity, right? So there's this, I mean, that's something for me, I was talk to people and I'm like, well, it seems that you're used to doing things one way, and then life kind of just asks you to go to the opposite side of the wheel, because how can you evolve if you don't go to the opposite side of the wheel? And so then just listening to you, it makes me feel that the validity of control is because of the fear of play. And I don't have an answer for that, because it seems when we're talking all the time, all people want to do is make it till Friday. I mean, I don't work a job that's my structure, but that's the language. And yet when we come really up close to that precipice, it again is that unworthiness or the fear or whatever ends up coming up. So I'm guessing that through your book, as one stepping stone or one shepherd, one guiding flashlight, you give these ideas of how to just in a microcosmic way unwind some of that fear that's not even real. I wonder sometimes if that's why we're here, just to unwind and untangle. It is to have fun, but you have to unwind and untangle for, have to, but that seems to be the most neutral language I can find, is if you untangle that thought, what opens up for you, if you untangle that identification. And so that's what I'm hearing. But it's so refreshing to hear that in a time where so many people are constricted. There's a lot of constriction of thought right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems, to use the word amusing, I would love to, go ahead.
Well, even when you think about why we're here, just that sentiment of to unwind everything. But if you look at, you have a toddler, right? Mm-hmm. So when you look at what's your toddler's name, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, I don't mind. Aaron, AA.
Mm-hmm. Oh, beautiful. Okay. So when you look at Aaron, right, or you look at any child, you actually do see this wild, open, curious, creative, energetic, enthusiastic world, mm-hmm. a world unto itself. And that's actually the truth of what we are. But we impose all of these controlling mechanisms, and they're imposed upon us, and we impose them even more because of how vast and unknown it all is, right? So it's like we want to protect this experience, and in the protecting, we lose the innocence, we lose the connection with what's most true, and we also lose the connection with what needs to move through the form in order for it to be able to bestow its gifts. Because if you look at, especially, I see this so often, I see it really often in women. I see it in men too, but I see it more often in women, like where there's so much suppression. There's so much like, do it this way and you have to be this way or that way. And even amongst, it's rampant. And so I feel like this idea that we have to kind of safeguard something, or we have to control something in order to not to not fall apart, to not be taken advantage of, to not, whatever it is that's creeping in there. And my take on it is like, that control is actually what creates this whole kind of cage around us. But the cage is something that we built, and it was co-creatively built, like we can put it that way. But it doesn't mean we can't liberate ourselves from that and be like that. Because again, to go back to what I was trying to stress a moment ago, is like what needs to be moved through. It needs to be like, if you are feeling some of those things, those less than rosy things that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, like they're there to serve you. They're there to bring you closer to your unique expression. So I think that's where there's a lot of work still needs to be done. But again, it's like, it's a unconditioning not from when we were first here as children, but that we've continued to kind of layer on ourselves and need to remove if we want to live this kind of life.
And give ourselves permission to do so, just like the book says.
Exactly.
Is there anything else? I mean, I can see why people are drawn to learn with you. And I think the word teacher, quite honestly, is apt, because teacher in my idea is a facilitator. The teacher is the one that sets the stage and walks away. I don't mean leaves, but a good teacher is somebody that knows that this person needs what's in the blue folder, but this person would be served by what's in the green folder without a attachment, just with an investment of growth, and I could hear that.
I'm so glad that you brought this back in, because I remember when I was listening to your podcast and you were talking about teachers, and I was like, yeah, exactly. She gets what a real teacher is. And now you're saying it again. And I'm so glad you brought it back in, because I actually didn't complete that sentiment, which was when earlier when we were talking about it, because when I really considered it, I was like, an educator, that word, it comes from to educe, edure. It's kind of an archaic word that we don't really use anymore. It's not induce, it's educe. So to bring forth the genius of others. And that, I think, is the huge difference between maybe someone who might call themselves a teacher or an educator and someone who truly is a teacher, as an advocate, that they're here for that purpose, which is really to bring forth. It's to remind you. There was this beautiful Ram Dass, aka Richard Alpert. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. It's really brilliant. He was a great orator, and one of the things I remember hearing him say years ago was, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know, but the perplexing problem is you don't know you know.
That's actually the essence of any worthwhile tradition.
Yeah. Voila. C'est tout. Exactly. Perfect.
So I feel like I could talk to you forever, and you are more than welcome, when you to come back and tell us when your retreats are, and we can spread the word. Is there anything in this moment that you are feeling that didn't get shared that you would like to add into this container before we close?
The only thing I feel called to say is, like, I am so glad that you went past whatever that resistance was and that you reached out, because I loved talking to you. I loved listening to everything to prepare for this and to find out more about you. I cannot wait to read your book, which I hope everyone listening has already read. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone who listened, because getting to the end of any podcast, especially one that dives as deep as this one, really says something about who you are as a human. So thank you for being with us, and thank you, Kate, for setting it all up. So that's all.
It was my absolute pleasure, Cort. I wish you every grace to propel you on the mission, because we need the work that you're sharing with us. So thank you for making the time. And I hope everyone reads your book. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a kind gesture. That is, I'll say this, there's this idea from anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, right? And he talks about every epoch, the human gift that they give back. Like when you have accrued, it's your turn to give back. And I know there's more coming from you, but I feel like this book is a give back. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you. Wow. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here on the Rebirth Podcast. Where would we be without you? Do us a favor, share, like, subscribe, and if you're feeling especially generous and you really want this to be the kind of messaging that is all over social media, one of positivity and upliftment, give us a 5-star review wherever you enjoy listening to the Rebirth Podcast.